1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi warriors, welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host Ingrid. Today, my guest bravely shares how men are also on the receiving end of domestic violence. His story details how love bombing can progress into various forms of abuse. Please note, this episode also includes incidents of animal cruelty, child abuse, and child molestation. Here is Dahlke's story.
Hi, my name is, since we're not doing that, you can call me Doc. It's a name I earned as a combat medic in Iraq, and I guess that's where the story starts, or at least where we're going to start from. And it's kind of plays a big role in how I ended up in an abusive relationship. In early 2003, I deployed and spent about a year and a half gone, and over a year in combat. As a medic, I saw some of the worst, and was in pretty heavy combat. But I was hit several times with IEDs, which are roadside bombs for anybody that doesn't know. And I never got seriously hurt. At least I thought so. But I came home in 2004 with severe PTSD and a traumatic brain injury. And needless to say, my travel agent did not get a good Yelp review, but that's neither here nor there. Luckily, my injuries were caught pretty early, and I started receiving help from the VA. But I struggled, and I bounced from job to job, and I also struggled just staying in one place. Finally, I moved in with my brother and started going to the same college he was going to. That's when I met the woman who lived down the road from us. We'll call her Jessica. She started hanging out with my brother and I, as well as our friends, and she quickly became part of the group. This was a skill I saw her just use so many times, and she just morphed to fit into whatever clique or whatever group she was with, and ended up just manipulating everyone. Jessica just latched onto me and started just love bombing me, which, now I know the term. At the time, I was like, this is great. This is amazing. And, my self-esteem was pretty low at the time because I went from being a medic who could save everyone to being a patient. And I was struggling in school. I was struggling in life. But she just kind of built me up, and I fell for it. We started dating really quickly. And looking back, I can see how she just gradually isolated me from my friends and family more and more and more. She often used this metaphor of a frog being placed in boiling water and it not knowing the danger it was in. Looking back, I'm like, how did I not see this red flag? I mean, I guess I figured it was a parade for me. I don't know. But not too long after we started dating, Jessica had a falling out with her roommates. This is a pattern that I saw over and over and over in our relationship. But she had a falling out with her roommates and moved in with another roommate. And then a few months later, she had another falling out and moved in with my brother and I. After a little while, we decided we should get a bigger place, and we did. And it was all good at first. But then once she was settled in there, I was taken off that pedestal. And I so wanted to know what I did wrong, why the love had stopped. And I begged and begged and begged and begged for that attention, and I was just desperate for it. But, I just couldn't figure it out. And every time I talked to her about it, it's like, no, you're just misinterpreting it. It's because you've got a brain injury. It's because of this. And I now know about gaslighting. I learned so much through this. But if I started to kind of like come to my senses, it was like these little breadcrumbs of love bombing would start back. Over time, it just kind of wore me down. And then she went on a vacation with some of her friends. That was kind of spur of the moment. And I called her because it was like a 2-week vacation to New York. I called her, and her friend answered the phone drunk and was like, "Oh yeah, she's busy hooking up with this guy." And I was like, "What?" So after that call, she wouldn't return any of my texts or my calls. And granted, this was right on the verge of the dawn of everybody having smartphones. She had a BlackBerry, I had a flip phone. Yes, I'm old, but but you know, she came back and we talked. She's like, "No, that wasn't the case. My phone broke, but her same phone was miraculously working." I was stupid. Like, and I bought it, but we worked to like reconnect and all this. And she came home one day and was like, "Hey, we need to get our own place." Because, yeah, we were living with like 5 other people. It was a big house. We had our own room, our own bathroom. But by that point, she had started burning the bridges with the other roommates. Some had left. Some were just, basically come home, just go to their room and stay away from her. Later, I found out, because at this point she was handling all the finances, but she was basically conning people out of money, because she would have the bills in her name, and then she'd basically divide up the bills amongst the roommates, with her portion covered by the roommates. And I found out later about that. She wanted to move into this other house, so I agreed. And I was like, "Fine, let's do it." But the house was a foreclosure, so we had to gut it. My brother was working for this really great guy and doing construction at the time. So we hired my brother and the guy to help renovate the whole house. And I did some of the work too, because I worked with him occasionally. Like, this guy was like almost a surrogate dad to my brother and I. We had our dad, but you know, our buddy was like a dad to us. But found out that my now ex managed to basically get a bunch of money out of that. Our friend never told us until after the fact. Once we were alone in the house, that's when things got so much worse. The verbal abuse got way worse. Nothing was good enough for her. The emotional abuse was horrible. I would do odd jobs here and there, but I was 100% disabled through the VA. So I was a stay-at-home, husband for most of it. And I'd go to school for a class or two each semester. But, I did all the housework, all the cooking, everything. And no matter what, I was constantly criticized for it. And she was an interpreter, so she would leave at all hours. And I didn't really put 2 and 2 together, but she would often come back 6, 7 hours later wearing different clothes. And my mom was like, "She's probably cheating on you." And I was like, "No, no, no." And, if a little old lady tells you anything, just roll with it, because they're probably right. They've been around. Since we were living together, Jessica, my now ex, said that we needed to share bank accounts. By that, she meant I needed to share my bank accounts with her, not the other way around. So I signed so she could be on my bank accounts. And she basically took over everything from there. She kept telling me, "Oh, well, you can't handle it. You're bad with money," and every step of the way, I believed her. Basically, if I spent any money at all, she would flip out. Some months went by and things were pretty rough. I just dreaded when she'd be around. One day I came home and she was sitting on the couch crying. I was like, "What's going on?" Because she wasn't a big crier. And she was like, "Well, my sister is pregnant again. She's already got one kid. My best friend has 2 kids. I'm so behind everything." I was like, "No, that's not how it is." They always competed over everything. I kind of put that conversation towards the back of my mind because my dad got really sick about a week later. He called me. He's like, "Hey, I'm feeling really bad," and I talked to him, and I was like, "You need to go to the doctor." So we went to the doctor, and we found out he had terminal cancer. I started spending a lot of time with my dad, but it was like 4 months of him being in and out of the hospital. And he finally passed away after that. But as soon as he passed away, the love bombing started again. And I was like, well, maybe she's being supportive. It went for like a couple of months of just like this love bombing. And I was like, maybe she's changed. Maybe, yeah, they never change. I was like, well, she's supporting me now. Let's, talk about proposing. So I proposed. She said yes. And then, as soon as she said yes, we got married and love bombing stopped. I mean, it was like just a faucet was turned off. It's so amazing how quickly she can turn it on and off. And that's why I've always questioned like how much of it's real, how much of it's not, but that's neither here nor there. After the wedding, things just got worse. She started being more and more controlling, more and more just like verbally abusive. And I ended up finding a cat, a little teeny kitten. I mean, he was tiny because he was still nursing. He was a stray. I kept him. She wasn't like 100% into it, but she was okay with it. But as soon as like somebody came around, she's like, "Look at this wonderful cat we saved." But behind closed doors, no. It was my cat, my responsibility. Well, one night he hopped up on the bed, and I mean, granted, this is a kitten. His claws are sharp, his teeth are sharp. That's how they're made. Well, she started like shooing him away, and he knocked over her drink. And granted, this was not alcohol because she didn't drink alcohol. But she picked him up and slammed him into the wall. And I was like, what the, insert your expletive there. And I was like, hey, you can't do that. And that's the first time that she put her hands on me. She shoved me. And I know, yeah, I've been to combat. I've been blown up. I've been shot at. I've had knives broken off in my armor. Whatever. I was expecting that stuff. I wasn't expecting to get shoved. And I mean, she shoved me really hard into the wall. Just for some perspective, she's about 6 inches taller than I am and about 140 pounds heavier. So I was like, whoa, okay. The next day, she was all about, oh, I'm so sorry. I just lost my cool, blah, blah, blah. And love bombing just started again. I was like, okay. Maybe it was just, job stress and all the stress came together. Maybe. Again, I was stupid at the time. There's not a lot of excuses here. I was like, maybe it's not really her. But then, a little bit later, love bombing stopped again. And it was back to her normal, basically, you're my servant. And if you do anything, I'm going to rip into you. And I mean, all our friends, the few ones we still had contact with, were like, why are you with her? There was not a good answer I had. It was always like, well, I am. And, I took this vow to honor her and take care of her. But, anytime I brought it up with her, it was, oh, that's all in your head. I treat you great. It's like, okay. And some more rumors came out about her cheating on me, and I just kind of, ignored them. It had been probably about 6 months since we were married, and the love bombing started again. I was like, oh, maybe she's pulling out of this funk that causes this. And then she ended up getting pregnant because, whenever she was not love bombing, she was not affectionate at all. During love bombing, there was lots of affection. But she ended up being pregnant, and as soon as we found out she was pregnant, it all stopped again. There's a bit of pattern here. Yeah. She kept saying that she really wanted our baby to be disabled in some way because she wanted to show the world how to properly raise a disabled child. Granted, she interpreted for the deaf, so she thought she was all high and mighty when it came to these things. Towards the end of her pregnancy, she got into 2 car wrecks within a month of each other. Both were T-bone wrecks because she pulled out in front of somebody, and I will always have questions about that situation. But luckily, our little boy was born healthy and everything. Just prior to him being born, though, she apparently burned all her bridges with her work. She got fired from her job, could not find any freelance work, and told me that in order for us to, maintain a livelihood, she was going to have to move. And then the only place she could find a job was 4.5 hours away. So right after our son was born, we moved. And for whatever reason, when he was born, it was like a fog lifted and I could see everything for what it was. And I was like, you're never going to have to deal with this, buddy. I'm going to fight for you. And I still hadn't figured out exactly what was wrong with his mom. And I chalked it up to depression and maybe some postpartum, but I wasn't quite sure. I mean, I know she had a really bad childhood. Her parents were violent and abusive towards each other, and there's a lot of alcoholism. But I didn't quite understand what was going on. We moved down to the new house, and immediately she started getting in arguments with the neighbors, and then she started going to work. Here, where the state we live, it's incredibly hard to get fired from your state job. But she got into arguments every day with her boss, threatening to sue him, and saying he was sexually harassing her. He was gay, by the way. Just throwing that out there, not saying it's not possible, but probability, She got fired from that after about 4 months. After that, she really started to spiral. If she's not feeling on top of everything, like Everybody's worshiping her. Things are horrible. She started getting more and more physically aggressive with me. During my son's first 6 months of life, she would nurse him, but that was it. She wanted nothing to do with him, didn't talk to him, wouldn't say I love you. Unless we were out in public, then she was all lovey-dovey because it got her attention, as she wanted to be perceived as this perfect mom. I kept trying to get her help over and over and over. And she got really weird with the stuff she would say. Like, she would say, I don't know why I'm this way. I think there's a demon in me. I'm like, okay. Like, how do you respond to that? But luckily, a friend of mine had moved down to the area and had taken over as head of a therapist's office. So I reached out to him. I was like, dude, I need help. This is so much bigger than me, and this stuff is beyond me. And I just can't see a way out. So I went in and sat down with him and I kind of told him everything. He's like, yeah, dude, I know. I've met her. We've hung out. I can't diagnose her, but here's the DSM. Here's your cluster B personalities. I want you to really read the narcissistic personality disorder and the borderline. Just learn about that. And he set me up with one of their therapists there. Started working with the therapist, and Jessica, my ex, started getting worse, and just kept getting worse. And she got to the point where one day she was just out in the car, and I was like, are you coming in? Because she said she'd go to work. Now, granted, we're not getting any money, but she'd be gone 6-8 hours. And come to find out, she was having an affair with the neighbor. I went out there and I got in the car with her. I was like, are you okay? She's like, I'm just struggling, and I think I should kill myself. I was like, here's your choices. I call 911 right now, or we call a therapist, get you set up for tomorrow. Which do you want to do? So we called a therapist and got her set up. And she went maybe 4 or 5 times, but didn't really help. She just got angrier and angrier. She just kept getting more and more physically aggressive. Like, if I was asleep, I get punched or kicked. There's pinching and scratching. I'll never forget it. She got up in the middle of the night one night, and I was like, you okay? And she looked at me, said, it'd be really hard to identify your body if you didn't have hands or a face. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, that's just not a real good conversation starter. At this point, I was starting to look at divorce as an option. After she said that, we lived in a really small town. She left for the day, and I went over to the police station. I mean, our police station had about 6 guys that worked there. So I ended up meeting with the police chief. I was like, dude, this is what's going on. I'm really to the point I'm worried about her. I'm worried about my safety. I'm worried about my son's safety. What do I do? And he's like, well, you can have her committed, but there's not a whole lot they can really do at this point. We're here for you if you need to get away, that kind of thing. Just know we're like right down the road. At this point, my son was probably about 15 months, 18 months, somewhere in there. And if he was loud at night or needed anything, she would rage and flip out. To the point, like, I would put him in the car and, like, drive him around. And so he could sleep comfortably in the car without having to deal with her. There were nights that I just went and sat at the police station. So because I was like, dude, I'm too tired to drive. And I talked to the cops. They knew me. And, it just went on and on. When my son was about 2.5, I think she knew something was up because I went and met with a divorce attorney. They put me in touch with the domestic violence shelter there. The domestic violence people were really welcoming. They were like, hey, we're here to support you. Here's an attorney you need to go see. Like, this is how you do it. This is how you get out of the situation. I was like, yeah, this might be what needs to happen. But I still wasn't 100% there. But one night, I went for a walk in the neighborhood. And we had the windows up at the house. And I had one of the dogs with me. And he just started pulling towards the house. Like, he wasn't a big puller, but I was like, what in the world, dude? And I walked right back to the house and kind of just followed him. And went inside, and he made a beeline for the bathroom. Like, this is weird. Because normally, if there's a bath involved, he doesn't want to be near it. But the door was shut. So I opened the door. And here I see my ex-wife with her hand over my son's mouth and nose, trying to keep him from crying. And I was like, what are you doing? And she was like, oh, well, he was just crying and I couldn't get him to stop. And I was like, this is not how you get a baby to stop crying. And I was like, you need to get out of here. She got up and she pushed me, and by this point I knew she was going to push me. So I just kind of rolled with it, and she walked out. I closed the door and locked it. And I got him calm, I got him dressed and everything. Got him to bed, and I went and I talked to her. I was like, you were out of control. I know you tried therapy one time, but let's try it again. Let's do some couples counseling. Because I knew if we went to family court, it'd be an uphill fight. I've got a Y chromosome and other Y parts, which is a liability in family court, especially in the state I live in. Started going to counseling, and basically every counselor had this kind of eyebrows raised, like, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into expression. I came home one day and she wanted to talk. I was like, okay. She's like, so I can't find any work here. Granted, she'd burned all the bridges again. She's like, but there's a job opening back in my hometown, and we should move there. And her hometown was, I'm not the best with geography, but a little over 2,000 miles away. And I was like, nah, that's not going to happen. Because, I was already moving towards a divorce. I had one foot out the door. And we talked, and I was like, let me think about this. A couple of days went by, and I sat her down before she was going out to work again, air quotes. And it's like, our relationship's not good enough to move 2,000 miles. It's not going to survive, and I just can't take any more of this. I want a divorce. And I was recording the whole thing with my phone just in case. She flipped out. I mean, she was yelling, screaming, smacking, just whole 9 yards. I had left my son with my mom, so luckily he wasn't a party to this. And she's like, well, I've got to go. And then she grabbed my phone and saw I was recording. So she deleted that and slammed the phone down. The next morning, she asked me to go to one more therapy session with her. The conversation took place on a Wednesday. Thursday, she asked me to go to a therapy session with her for that following Friday. I was like, okay. let's do that. We went, and I was like, even if we get a divorce, we still need to reach a place where we can communicate because we're going to have to co-parent. That was pretty much what I said in the therapy session. My mom kept my son for us while we had that therapy session, and then we all went out to eat. She sat there and ate with us. Everything was great. I was like, hey, I need to stop and pick up some dog food and stuff on the way home. And I had to get a few odds and ends because the guy was coming to pressure wash our house, which had been scheduled for months. She's like, okay, no problem. Well, our son got in the car with her, and she left. This was about 4 o'clock. I stopped and picked up the dog food, picked up a few things for the pressure washer guy, like the tarps to cover the bush and stuff. I came home and nobody was there. I had this really sick feeling. I was like, dude, something's wrong. And my brother was coming into town because that weekend was my son's birthday. I called him. I was like, hey, Jessica didn't come home, and she's got her son. He's like, okay, I'm coming over. So he came over, and we waited. We called her. Nothing. About 4 hours later, I called the sheriff. I was like, hey, my wife's missing. She's got her son. They came over. I explained the situation to him. And the chief of police swung by. He was like, yeah, what's going on? And I was like, explained to him the situation. He's like, okay. I'll keep an eye out. And he left. The sheriffs made all these phone calls. They tried to ping her phone, everything, nothing happened. So for the next 4 days, I didn't know what was going on. I was terrified. They had a missing persons report out. My son turned 3 while he was missing. And, it was brutal. A few days after the weekend had passed, I got a call from the chief of police. He's like, I need you to know something. I was like, what's that? He goes, she has taken out papers saying that you are violent and you are going to have to leave your house. I'm coming over and we'll serve you. I'll be there when they serve you. I was like, okay, well, I'm meeting with the attorney right now to file emergency custody orders. He's like, okay, give me a call when you're on your way and I'll meet you there. My brother was, he was in law school. He had just graduated law school at that point. And so he came with me too. And I was kicked out of my house. I was allowed to take one of my dogs because she was my service dog. And just the stuff that basically I needed, like clothes, and I wasn't allowed to take files or anything like that. And I was assured that my ex had said that she was coming back to the house, so somebody would be there to take care of the animals. It's like, okay. As long as somebody can be here for the animals, and I know my son's safe, that's all I need. So I went and got a motel room with my brother, and for the next week, we stayed there. But about 4 days into our stay, the sheriff's deputy contacted me and said, just want to let you know, I contacted your ex, and she said she's not going back to the house. So all the dogs and animals had been in the house, locked up. And I was like, well, can I get them to board them? She's like, you can't, but somebody else can. So my brother went down and got them and boarded them for us. I don't know if it was a kindness on his part or what, but he was like, the dogs are good. The dogs are good. they had trashed the house. I mean, chewed through doors, ripped up carpet, torn up their feet, broken teeth trying to get out. I mean, there was blood smeared on the walls from them. It was horrible. I think it was 2.5 weeks before I could come home. And in that time, she had gone to the next county over and given them the sob story that I was violent and scary. But I had never laid a hand on her. And I had never, she said I was financially abusive. So we went to court. She had the domestic violence people from the county over, like, supporting her and everything. And I tried to get the domestic violence people that I had spoken with to come with me. I went in there with all this evidence, and we were granted 50-50 custody at the time. It was week on, week off. Basically, I was given possession of the house. She was living wherever she wanted to, because she bounced from place to place and boyfriend to boyfriend, and it was pretty bad for my son. That was 5 years ago. We're still going to court, and our first go around in court for permanent custody, I brought up all the abuse, and her attorney and the judge laughed because they said, with my training, I should have protected myself. And I was like, wait, guys. So if I fought back, I would have automatically been placed in custody for 72 hours. I would have been branded abusive, even if I just fought back. Because I had a friend who, he and his wife got drunk, and she went to slap him, and she ended up scratching her arm on his hand when he went to blog. He spent about a week in jail because of it. Even though she was like, wait, no, like, they didn't call the cops, somebody else did, but that's just how the laws are here. But yeah, the judge laughed, and he's like, well, you should have fought back. This is a mother of my child. All my life I've been brought up not to hit women. It takes a lot to do that, and it didn't matter. I got stuck with the standard custody, which is every other weekend, and 6 weeks during the summer and holidays, which, has been really rough on my son. And in the interim, she's moved. It's been 5 years, and she has moved probably 8 times, had a ton of boyfriends. My son's been molested while in her custody, and he's been abused. I've got pictures of a bruise across his head when he was less than 4 years old. And they match up perfectly with knuckles. I asked him what happened, and he said, Mommy hit me and I fell down. Before I asked him, I turned on my camera and recorded it. Showed it to DSS. Well, she had started doing contract work with DSS. So basically, they were just like, oh, okay. The social worker that came out and inspected the house, my house, and watched the videos and everything, they were really concerned. It got kicked over to the county where she was living and working with DSS, and all of a sudden it got dismissed. I mean, it basically the same thing when he was molested. There was another kid that was his stepbrother, quote unquote, because she was living with another person, and DSS was like, oh, there's nothing we can do. It's another kid. I thought by leaving the marriage, I would be protected by the courts. I thought they'd at least, even if they didn't protect me, they'd help protect my son. They failed on every count when it comes to my son and I. And now, it's been 4 years since the last ruling. I had to wait a year to refile for custody. And it's been continued for the past 2.5 years. But the court, as long as they're getting their Title 4D money, they don't really care. I've gotten to the point now, though, that I'm very vocal about everything. Because, growing up, and even partially now, whenever you hear domestic violence, or at least when I hear it, I think of women. And you start looking at the statistics, and it's not just women. There's lots of men that get it. And you look around in our society and, even media, and it's okay for women to hit men on TV or slap them or scream at them. And it's like, wait. If the genders were reversed, this would be totally unacceptable. So I've gotten really vocal about it because if it can happen to me, it can easily happen to anybody else. And that's why I'm so open about what happened.
I agree with you. So the first episode I did for this podcast, it was just kind of an intro. So I went over some terminology and I went over some statistics, and I included all the statistics. And before I started listing those, I actually mentioned that when I did just a generic Google search on domestic violence, almost everything is about women and girls. It was actually really difficult to find good statistics on men. Now, the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence has great statistics regarding men, as well as the CDC. But I think for domestic violence victims and survivors, it's hard a lot of times to leave the relationship and to get the backing of the legal system and have anything done fairly. And I think it's so much worse, like you said, that Y chromosome.
I even asked my attorney, I sent her a clip from The Simpsons. It's Chief Wiggum. And he's like, oh yeah, we can't protect you, but we can punish you.
Right. I mean, that's it, right?
Yeah.
Since the first trial that you mentioned when the judge laughed at you, do you think that the belief system has changed at all within the legal system as far as thinking that men you should have just fought back?
I don't know. I mean, granted, we were in a more rural county then.
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know how much that played into it. It was very good old boy. There was a sign on the courthouse as you go in. It says, you must wear shoes to enter. I remember taking a picture of it wow, really? We're up in county now, which is the capital of our state. Yeah. It's supposedly better, but from what I saw at the Zoom meeting that we were in on Tuesday, it didn't seem much better. I'm still trying to get my son out of that situation.
You would think, I mean, you obviously know that's not what's really happening, but you would think that the situation that she has him living in, take away any of the abuse prior to that, just going from place to place and everything that's happened to him, that would be enough for her to, if not completely lose custody, at least have supervised visits or something.
Yeah.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, she spent 4 months living in a pop-up camper because she lost the house they were living in. And I mean, they didn't have running water or anything like that, and nothing could be done.
I think every story that will be on here is important, but yours is incredibly important because it does show, like you said, most people think that domestic violence is aggressive against women. And your story is incredibly important because it shows that it can happen to men. And it's not to minimize emotional, psychological, financial abuse, but it can also be physical.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important for especially those who are not familiar with domestic violence and sit and wonder why individuals stay in relationships or why they don't leave or how they got there in the first place. Or if it were me, I never even would have been there or I would have done this. And nobody knows. You can't say that. It's calculative, it's manipulative, and it's done over time. And
it's subtle. Like,
Yes.
it blows my mind, like, just how incrementally it starts.
Yes. And I think certain individuals, and I'm not saying that any victim or survivor is weak, but I think there's a personality trait that perhaps is there that is, I am all about family. I'm dedicated. I will try to do whatever I can to keep family together and to work on a relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
they know they can take advantage of that. And the love bombing, it's such a heightened, like, the love is amazing, and it's you just want to get back to that again.
And it's so bizarre, like, you know, I've led all these people in combat. I've done all kinds of crazy stuff, but still, I just like walked into it like a deer in headlights. Like, oh, this is gonna be great. It's really just amazing now that I can step back and watch this cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow. I mean, I need to have like an honorary psych degree at this point.
I know, right? Well, especially when when you hear the terms gaslighting, love bombing, and borderline personality disorder, narcissism, when you are familiar with the terms and then you look at the relationship, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so clear as day now. I can see it. And that's how these definitions were made, is because studying these kinds of behavior. And it's wild how it just lines up so perfectly with the definitions and what happens. Doc, thank you so much for coming
Thank
on.
you.
I forgot to say this while we were talking, but Doc, thank you for your service to our country. And thank you again for sharing your story with all of us. I think you were incredibly brave in both situations. Now, I don't know about the rest of you, but I absolutely loved the fact that despite everything he has endured in his military and personal life, he has maintained an infectious sense of humor. Keep up the laughs and the fight, Doc. We are all going to be rooting for you. I'll be back next week with another story. Until then, have each other's back, stay strong, and always remember you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1in3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1in3podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1in3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.